All right, thank you so much for having me here. It's really a pleasure and an honor to speak at this conference and to be surrounded by the energy of love. This is my favorite topic, so I'm really passionate to have the chance to share it. It's been the focus of my life and my research for the past 11 years, so we'll dive in. I'll start with a great quote that we all heard actually just a few minutes ago. All my relations, or interbeing, when we start to see that not as corny, but as legitimate, will heal. So that is really the entirety of what my focus on. So I thought I'd tip my hat there. So I want to start with this sort of theoretical proposal of a sort of longitudinal developmental process towards love, beginning with the intervention of psychedelics, moving on to interbeing experiences, and we'll cover that more in depth, to the integration of those experiences into a lasting sense of identity, so not just a passing experience, but something that totally reorients the way that we understand and see ourselves, and from there into the behavior and the experience of love, and from love to wellness. So I want to start with this statement that failures of love are dangerous. When we think of love, we can think of rom-coms, we can think of pink, we can think of sort of curlicues and fluffy things, right? But when we think of the Holocaust, when we think of the factory farm industry, when we think of the current wars that are happening right now, these are failures of love. So I really think it is a national defense issue. How do we connect to love? Now, I'd love to see a conference like this at the Pentagon. I work with veterans, a lot of special operations forces guys, and they're all about responding to emergencies. But when they connect to Iboga, when they connect to Bufo, these military men understand.
I won't hear you if this is here.
Oh, yeah. These military men understand that love is foundational to what we're after. And just like in the food industry, we can have these sort of responses down the line where we get to a critical medical condition, but where does that all start from? Where do these wars start from? It's failures of love. So I think this is a really, really important topic to speak to in the context of science, in the context of our personal lives, but also in the context of national policy. And love has to do with an awareness of our connectedness. So we're all exploring different notions of love, definitions of love. I thought I would put this out there, that there's something fundamentally about the nature of our connectedness. We can see it in eye contact. We can feel it when we touch nature, when we work together, and when we transcend. These all have to do with aspects of being aware of our connectedness. Fortunately, we have a wonderful tool, psychedelics, to explore our connectedness. And we can think of this exploration as sort of analogous to the blind men exploring the elephant, right? There's this sort of common story of a blind man trying to understand what an elephant is, and one blind man says it's a spear as it's feeling the tusk. Another says it's a rope as feeling the tail. And another says it's a brick house as it's exploring the body. And we are sort of like the blind men exploring reality. And the elephant is the elephant of reality. And we have these wonderful tools, ayahuasca, bufo, iboga, psilocybin, to explore different facets of our reality. So I'll start with just a couple of anecdotes of my own personal experiences in these voyages. So 5-MeO-DMT I've experienced as oneness via merging with the void. Ayahuasca, oneness via interdimensional intelligence. Iboga, oneness via loving confrontation. And psilocybin, oneness via oceanic self-dissolution. This is an AI-generated image that I created myself with a prompt. Show me the connectedness of all animals, life, memory, and eternality. And it showed me this, and I thought this is a great representation of Bufo. So we think there is this central light, this central emanation that is the core source of all of us, and we are here. We are in this arc, in this connected process. This is a visual representation of ayahuasca, as I've experienced it, that the process of nature itself is intelligent. Nature is what we are. We are walking, talking earth, and we are not separate from nature. So to witness that we are part of this universal intelligence is to see that the entire process of nature is intelligent and that we are seamlessly connected to that. This is a representation of Iboga, through which, in my personal experiences, I've felt this merging of energy forms of bodies, within the universe, and a lot of direct applications, practical applications. In this case, I was struggling with jealousy in a relationship, and Bufo confronted me with that. It showed me my partner merging with other people, and it did it lovingly. It showed me that energy merging into myself, merging into the universe, and I almost laughed. I think I might have laughed, who knows, in those experiences what's really happening, but there's a sense of levity of I don't need to be jealous. We're all part of one universal body. When we're in our ego form, jealousy easily arises, but when we're in this universal form, we can see this merging and be okay with it. So diminishment of fear. Through psilocybin, this recognition that as the ocean waves, the universe peoples. Our relationship to the universe is the exact same as the relationship of a wave to the ocean. There's no part of the wave that is not ocean. There's no part of the human mind or consciousness that is not universe. We are a fluctuating pattern of intelligence moving through a medium that we can call the universe, the quantum field, whatever we want to term it. So moving from these experiences then into a lasting sense of identity is what part one of my research was about. Basically, how do we fortify an experience into a notion of self that persists in our experiences and our behaviors and our beliefs? So I'd like to prompt a thought exercise for everyone right now. So we have a direct awareness right now. I know I am me. And I believe that ultimately, I will also be me 1 minute from now. So how many people believe that you will be you 1 minute from now? Pretty much the whole audience, yeah. What about, I am also my neighbor next to me? How many people believe this? A solid contingency here, yeah. Yeah, good. This is a much less common belief. But equally, we know that space and time are just as connected. Space-time is one fabric, and there's no reason to isolate identity in space, but not in time. You know, the continuity of identity in space and time is equivalent. So these beliefs essentially should be equivalent when we look at it from a scientific lens. This is a way of supporting a lot of ancient wisdom. We can look at physics, we can look at biology. That's what my work in the interbeing field and psychedelic integration kind of centers on. So I'll elaborate a little more on this later. But this notion goes back to the Buddhist monk and many other figures, Thich Nhat Hanh. And Thich Nhat Hanh coined this term interbeing. So in Thich Nhat Hanh's words, true self is non-self, the awareness that the self is made only of non-self elements. There's no separation between self and other, and everything is interconnected. Once you are aware of that, you are no longer caught in the idea that you are a separate entity. So taking this into the language of modern science, we can see this articulated by Stephen Wolfram. He's a genius mathematician and programmer. He got his PhD when he was 15 or something like that, wrote Wolfram Alpha, highly acknowledged figure in the field of science. And he said, we can think about all sorts of systems as effectively doing computations. Whether it's a brain, whether it's a cloud responding to the different thermal environment that it finds itself in, we can ask ourselves, are our brains doing vastly more sophisticated computations than happens in the fluids in the atmosphere? He said, at first, I'd assumed that the answer to that was yes. We are carefully evolved. We are doing much more sophisticated stuff than any of these systems in nature, but it turns out that's not the case. We might say, there's one thing we've got. We're special. We've got all this intelligence and all these things which nothing else can have. But that's not true. there are all these different systems of nature that are pretty much equivalent in terms of their computational, or for that matter, intellectual capabilities. And in this article, he elaborates on how this is a many, many decades, 40 years of research for him that led him to this conclusion. And it speaks to that human, I think of it as a sort of baby-like egocentrism, that we emerge and we're like, oh, like I'm the center of everything, just like a baby might emerge from the universe. And then it realizes, oh, actually not. And just seeing this in the lens of science is helping us to sort of translate it into the words of culture. And so he finishes, intelligence and computation are the same thing. And there's computation all over the universe, whether it's in a turbulent fluid producing some complicated pattern of flow, whether it's in the celestial mechanics of some interaction of an asteroid with this, that, or the other, or whether it's in brains. So this is to say something sort of trite yet maybe profound, that the brain is nature. That means our consciousness is nature. And when we think in these terms, actually I'll pause on that thought and just show some cool images first of basically intelligence in nature. We can see it represented visually. And see this in the words of Alan Watts.
Now, I want to propose another idea altogether. You know, there are astronomers that say there was a primordial explosion, an enormous bang millions of years ago, billions of years ago, which flung all the galaxies into space. Well, let's take that just for the sake of argument and say that was the way it happened. It's like you took a bottle of ink and you threw it at a wall. Smash! And all that ink spreads. And in the middle, it's dense, isn't it? And as it gets out on the edge, the little droplets are finer and finer and make more complicated patterns. See? So in the same way, there was a big bang in the beginning of things, and it spread. And you and I, sitting here in this room, as complicated human beings, are way, way out on the fringe of that bang. We are the complicated little patterns on the end of it. Very interesting. But so we define ourselves as being only that. If you think that you are only inside your skin, you define yourself as one very complicated little curlicue, way out on the edge of that explosion, way out in space and way out in time. Billions of years ago, you were a big bang. But now you're a complicated human being. And then we cut ourselves off, like this, and don't feel that we're still the big bang. But you are. Depends how you define yourself. You are actually, if this is the way things started, if there was a Big Bang in the beginning, you're not something that is a result of the Big Bang. On the end of the process, you are still the process. You are the Big Bang, the original force of the universe, coming on as whoever you are. See, when I meet you, I see not just what you define yourself as, Mr. So-and-so, Miss So-and-so, Mrs. So-and-so. I see every one of you as the primordial energy of the universe coming on at me in this particular way. I know I'm that too. But we've learned to define ourselves as separate from it.
So in summary, it's a good joke, but it's real. And to elaborate on that meme, we could say this. Here's a newer picture of me. And if we took a picture right now, every snapshot internally, if you could capture my point of view and I could capture all of your point of view, this would all be a picture of me. And we would be living as this fundamental identity through each and every experience here. And this is not new knowledge. It's been captured by traditions and cultures all over the world for all of time, essentially. It's a lot of words to describe this: interbeing, inlek, alakin, Ubuntu, non-duality, self-transcendence, oneness, entheism, open individualism, I and I, anatta, moksha, and you can keep going. But I think what the new opportunity is to fortify this into the language of science, to make it last. We've had a lot of different cultures, a lot of different fluctuations, and ideas can come and go, and I think some of the beauty of science is that it can give a lasting sort of duration to these ideas. Just like with the idea of evolution, through science we can make that a cultural meme that can propagate because there's evidence and because there's a way of understanding it deeply. And I think the time is ripe for a paradigm shift in terms of who we understand ourselves to be. So in Alan Watts' words, what you are basically, deep, deep down, far, far in, is simply the fabric and structure of existence itself. And we can talk about what this fabric is in a number of different levels and different languages. One of those languages is quantum field theory. So from the perspective of quantum field theory, the entirety of reality is constituted by a quantum field, which has no separation. But that quantum field we can understand as individuating itself into particles. So the field is a field of potential, which collapses into the individual experience. We can think essentially of consciousness as doing something analogous. Right now, it is self-evident that the quantum field, or the fabric and structure of reality, has collapsed into your individuated experience. So your experience of mind is self-evident and the only thing, perhaps, that you can't argue. So it is self-evident that if this is the base of reality, this is the behavior, that it has collapsed into your particulate experience of consciousness. And we can think of one of the attributes of a quantum particle or the quantum field collapsing into a particle is that it can sort of be in two positions at once. This is superposition, right? So in classical states, we think of something can only be in one place or only in another place. But a quantum particle we can think of as being in two places at once. We could essentially think of consciousness as doing the same thing, that consciousness is here. I can experience that, but I trust and I know that it is out there as well. So we can think of essentially the quantum field of consciousness collapsing into the particulate form of an individual experience, but being in superposition as every other experience at once in this room and really across the entire galaxy. So if we think about this from sort of like an information science perspective, we could almost visualize it as this network of complex relationships collapsing into an individual experience, collapsing into another experience, another experience, another experience. And this is just one sort of visual way to represent that. Bringing in the language of integrated information theory, we can look at this from another scientifically supported lens. So from integrated information theory, we describe consciousness as integrated information. When we think about the flow of information, there are no boundaries in information. So I can imagine that there's boundaries perhaps in my physical body. It seems that, physically I start here and end there, sort of. But if I take a matrix-like sort of worldview and look at information, what I would visualize is my physical tongue moving, the air particles vibrating, going out into each ear, right? Each ear taking in the cochlea and the neural signals there, going into your thought processes, the sodium-potassium channels in your thoughts, causing whatever behavioral reactions you're having, causing your body to move. And if we visualize that, this whole room would be just one super connected field that would extend boundlessly to the entire universe. So we can really think about, when we look at information theory and consciousness, a lens through which to support oneness in a very empirical way. Two of the postulates or kind of core principles of integrated information is that information is specific. So each experience is what it is by differing from others, and information is unified. So this experience of self includes the colors here, the sense of body. There's a unity in each individual experience. And these principles are very interesting when we sort of elaborate on oneness and look at the mechanism. What does this imply? So beginning with kind of like our intuitive sense of how reality is, we think of it as this way. We think of there's the here and now, and there's my mental experience, and I kind of isolate myself on this timeline, and like we explored earlier, I kind of think, well, yeah, I'm going to be all of these selves in time. And sort of everyone else has their timeline too. And we're all going to travel along our timelines. We're going to be our different little colored selves. And we can imagine this as like a sort of linear progression isolated in space, in which we go through life and then, we die. And then what? I don't know. The line just drops off and there's this big question. It's just like a sort of death challenges this notion, right? So what if we think of it, what if we flip the axis of space and time? It might look kind of like this. A progression across space. Another way to represent that is thinking of what is the behavior of the here and now. So spatially, it is located somewhere. Let's say this guy's here and now. And then we could think of it as being in superposition, or another word for that would be shifting to a different here and now. Well, a question that comes up often is, why does it have to shift? It feels like my here and now stays here. I feel that I'm just continuing. I don't feel that I'm shifting across space. But this feeling is essentially, we could say, a byproduct of memory. Memory is linked only in our brain, in our time frame. But if we imagine that we had a memory that was linked across space, we would have access to this shifting. And we can say that essentially our perception is analogous to that memory. So we could say empathy or perception is analogous to witnessing. I see your eyes, and so I know consciousness will shift. It will be there. It's not limited to this framework here, right? And when we go back to the principles of integrated information theory, we can say one particular experience is what it is by nature of not being what it isn't. So for me to be here speaking is not to be there sitting and listening. And we can't have both of those things merged into one sort of blob in the same way that I can't be myself right now, as well as my 50-year-old self, as well as my 4-year-old self. I have to shift from this moment to the next and the next in order to sort of honor the individuality of each of those particular moments. So in the same way, we could say that consciousness, or the source, must shift from one self to the next in order to actually acknowledge that it is happening outside of just this ego framework. So we can think of this as sort of similar, in essence, to the progression across time. In the language of developmental psychology, I think we could perhaps put this forward as a theory. We might label it a theory unifying minds. So when we're children, we develop a theory of mind. So that's the theory that other individuals exist. They have a conscious experience. But we don't necessarily unify our own mind or consciousness with those individuals. And certainly our behavior as a human species is testament to that. That we isolate ourselves, and in isolating ourselves, we prioritize this experience over others. And that's a dangerous thing to do. So we could think about, what if you didn't believe that you would be yourself tomorrow? You might ride your motorcycle really fast and do a lot of drugs and make bad relationship decisions or something, right? It's like, heck, I'm gonna do everything because it's the last day, right? And then tomorrow comes in yourself, you're like, oh shoot, I just really ruined my life. And I think we do the same thing in space. Like, what if you thought, what if I'm gonna be that factory farmed cow? How would I behave? Like, would I really do what I'm doing now if I literally thought that is an instance of me? I think it would call some of those behaviors into question. So going into a little bit of my own science, I'm mostly interested in the ideas. So like a lot of the data and stuff is in the papers if you guys want to read it. But basically went through a rigorous developmental process to come up with an interbeing identity scale. And we essentially define interbeing identification in 3 different domains. That is oneness with nature, oneness with the cosmos, and oneness with other beings. And then looked at that on the levels of experiences, beliefs, and behaviors. And a lot of the core notion of this research is that psychedelics tap us into interbeing identity. So if we can measure and therefore validate the importance of interbeing identity, we can look at how does a psychedelic experience translate into a lasting sense of identity? How does that lasting sense of identity get integrated then into our behaviors, and do those behaviors then impact our wellness? So we found a single factor model and just did a very cursory exploration of relationship satisfaction, giving, purpose, and inspiration. Ethical eating were standing out as really strong correlates of the interbeing factor. So moving on to part 2 of my research is in defining and measuring psychedelic integration. So first we had to think about, like, what is integration? Starts with the term integration itself is just combining different things. So weaving together two things that are different is the essence of integration. When it comes to psychedelics, we're weaving together essentially the mystical and the mundane. So we came up with these different attributes of integration. One, that it's a process, it's an ongoing unfolding by which a psychedelic experience translates. So there's some element of connection there into positive changes. It's helpful in daily life. So it's an embodied change. We then looked at, first we were just thinking in terms of behaviors, and then clinicians were like, hey, what about the experience of integration? And we're like, oh yeah, that's a good thing to measure too. So we created these two different measurements. One is actively, behaviorally engaging with integration, and we kind of isolated these subdomains of reflection. So reflecting on the experience, what did that mean? How does it translate into my life? Like helping, talking with therapists, et cetera. And then connecting that. So it doesn't just end at reflection, it translates into our behaviors. So do I feel that my behaviors are aligned with the nature of the information that I gained from my experience? That's essentially connection. And then on the felt experience, we could perhaps postulate that there might be a beginning with behavior and then kind of that translating into the experience of feeling integrated. First, there's emotionally feeling settled, so feeling that, if you had a huge, amazing experience, it could be ego inflation and has the ego settled back down. If it's a fearful experience, if you feel discombobulated, confused, whatever it is there, have those experiences of fear, confusion settle back down. So have we come back to a state of settledness? And then do we feel that the internal lessons are sort of harmonized with our life? There's a great YouTube video I watched many, many years ago of a guy who had an LSD experience with a hot dog that screamed at him, "Don't eat me." And we could think about the integration process there, right? Like first we have to make meaning of that. What is going on with this screaming hot dog? Well, maybe if I was a factory farm animal, I'll be screaming, "Don't eat me" too. And so this guy's seeing deeper into the nature of his food. And then he might have to connect that and say, oh, okay, maybe it's also making him feel unhealthy, and so maybe he has to connect that into non-hot dog eating behaviors. And then going into the experience, is this guy feeling settled? Was that a scary hot dog to him? Was that a disconcerting experience? And then is he acting in line with that awareness? So has he started to change his behaviors in terms of eating? And then the end result will be feeling improved. Like he's probably going to be feeling more healthy if he's not eating so many hot dogs on LSD. This should translate into improvements in life. So you guys could all maybe think of an experience that you've had and call to mind, one of more maybe radical psychedelic experiences and just sort of test around this scale. So under behaviors, the first category is reflection. Have you given yourself mental space to reconnect to your experience? So I work with a lot of veterans, and this is a really important item with high-achieving populations, where a lot of people will go back into their jobs, their intense work environments, and won't give themselves mental space. We can think of this as essentially like trying to grow a plant without any room around it. If it was just choked out by a whole bunch of other plants, it wouldn't be able to grow. And when we're choking out our psychedelic experience with a whole bunch of other tasks and all these things, we're not going to have space to actually rework our neural networks and work that experience into our system. Have you applied learnings from your experience to your life? So has this translation process ensued? We can think about that as like kind of the real what matters, you know? Is this actually making a change? I think of psychedelics often as analogous to a map. We were gaining self-awareness, looking at this map of our psyche, looking at the map of the universe, but then do we walk those steps? You know, if we're sitting looking at a map all day, it's not a very rewarding experience or meaningful experience in the end. We actually have to walk the steps. I feel at peace with my experience. So that's speaking to the emotional component. And as people are also, the scale is great for individuals, not only to reflect, so part of the validation process of the scale is I would read these items to a whole bunch of people and ask them, what is your thought process as you're going through these questions? And pretty reliably, people were saying like, oh, this is great. It's getting me to think about not only, you know, is this true or not, but this is an important piece of my integration process. So it's actually, in some sense, guiding the integration process, providing a means of self-reflection, and then also as a tool for therapists to work with. So let's say somebody doesn't feel at peace, you can explore, or hasn't translated. It can be a great branch point to explore a whole bunch of different questions about why that might be. It could also, this question in particular, I think is an important one in terms of interfaces between psychedelic centers and the people. So if somebody ranked very lowly on this experience, that might be, let's say we had an automated system to cue the center. This person really feels not at peace. We might want to reach out and sort of extend, are you okay? Can we support you with your integration, et cetera? Harmonize. So I feel harmony between the experience and my inner being. And this might, you know, be a prompt for, let's say, doing some sort of body work, meditation. What do you feel? Where do you feel that? What is that telling you? There's a lot of different therapeutic methods to approaching this. And lastly, I feel the positive effect of the way I interpret my experience. So these are all just sample questions. The scale as a whole is 12 items. So there's a few more items that aren't here. So moving into love, why we're all here. So again, if we look at love as awareness of our connectedness, we can think of the outputs of that as things like warmth, goodwill, positive feelings, and care. And then the inputs, we could think about these different sources, right? Stillness, eye contact, psychedelics, words, touch, and more. And I think it's interesting to look at all these different forms of love, like eros, philia, ludus, pragma, and say like, what is common to these? I would say in each form of them, there's some reference to awareness of being connected. So we think about sexuality, for example, could include all these elements, maybe stillness, psychedelics, eye contact, words, touch. But certainly some of those elements will be there, and it's bringing two people closer to that shared awareness. When you're eye gazing or physically close together, you're aware that we are connected, right? Same thing with family, same thing with friends, same thing with awareness of the self. Like, oh, if I meditate and come back to where is my source? Oh, I'm connected to something beyond this form. So I think it's interesting both to look at the outputs of that awareness of connectedness and what helps us be aware of connectedness. And I think psychedelics, again, are a really powerful tool. And then agape, I think, is particularly interesting in regard to this topic of interbeing. Awareness, I don't know, the words came to me of like awareness that we are not only in this together, we are this together. So when we have this notion, we're all in it together, it's almost like we're separate from it and we're in it, but we are it, and there's a big difference when we identify with it and we see ourselves as it and as each other. We're not these separate, isolated instances apart from something that's the universe, where we are it expressing itself. So yeah, just kind of circling back to, again, we could say kind of this awareness as almost, memory links us into ourself, and I care about myself in part because of my memory. I can remember my childhood, I can remember eating lunch. My memory projects forward into an idea of the future, and I care about all those instances because I weave them together. I think awareness can do that on the horizontal plane. When we gain awareness, we can weave our identity together and then care about each other more. And I think it's our current context in some ways fosters some more awareness, and in other ways, importantly, maybe interferes with awareness when we're very isolated from each other. I think it's interesting to think about how do we build awareness. And then speaking to connection, we can think about at what level are we sort of interfacing with connection. On the level, there's maybe the level of being noticed is a very superficial level of being connected, not bad, but just maybe sort of at the surface. There's a level of being connected. I'm aware that we're having a mutual impact on each other. Then there's the awareness of being unified, interconnected as an entire field. But even in interconnectedness, I'm still often sort of keeping my center here and thinking, oh, everything is connected, but I'm still from this vantage point in the center. I think there's the level even below that is interbeing, to say actually thinking from the vantage point of everythingness itself, and spreading from there outward into the totality of everything. So some great quotes that I appreciate in this regard. Life is the universe experiencing itself in endless variety, from Alan Watts. We are a way for the universe to know itself, Carl Sagan. The eye through which I see God is the same eye through which God sees me. My eye and God's eye are one eye, one seeing, one knowing, one love. Speaking to one love, I and I means that God is within all of us, and we are all interconnected through divine presence. It's not just me or you, but I and I, a unity that transcends individuality. So thank you all for being in it with me, being me and me being you, and co-creating this experience. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
A couple questions.
Yeah, I think we have time for questions. Yes.
Right. Thank you. No. Thank you. Now it's on. It's on. Hey, thank you.
Yeah.
I can scream. Wonderful. I couldn't take as quickly as I wanted those shots from your presentation. Thanks a lot. And there was one moment I was thinking, is this the right turn we should take? And that is when you said, and now I will try to fortify this into the words, into the language of science. And fortify something into the language of science gave me the feeling that that's actually what you're not talking about. So is this the way to do it, or is there another way needed?
Yeah. That's a great question. Essentially, what is the role of science in regards to these topics of ultimate mystery? And I think there's an important statement of humility there that the ultimate mystery we will not know, and we will not be able to express in terms of science or language. I think that above that level of the ultimate mystery, there are some questions that we can start to gain some traction on that can be helpful. I think of even creationism and evolution. Who's to say one is better than the other? But I do think that one beneficial byproduct of evolution to say we are nature. we're not separate from nature. In creationism, we could say we are separate from nature, and we're put in here, and we have dominion over nature and the species. And I think it's helpful to say, no, we don't have dominion over nature. We are nature. We're one with it. There's Descartes, a long time ago, postulated that animals didn't have consciousness, and he pinned a dog to a wall with nails, and it was screaming out, and he dissected it live in order to demonstrate this belief. So I think our ontological beliefs have very meaningful impacts on our ethical actions. And I think that Interbeing kind of sets a groundwork for a very ethical outcome, essentially. So I think the more that we can move in the direction of like, getting different parties on board, whether it's scientists or experiential methods, I think it all kind of feeds together. And I think, maybe as you're highlighting, there's a very important humility and acknowledgement of the limitations of science, and a testament also to our experiences is so important. I've tried to like verbally articulate this to my dad for thousands of hours. He's never had the experience, and I'm nowhere.
Yeah. I mean, that's just the point. That's you can know it. Because you said there's ultimately some mystery we can't know, but you can know it, only that you cannot fortify it in language.
Yeah.
You can know it if you act accordingly, but that's not the approach of science. So because your dad wants a proof, but he should just experience it.
Yeah, and I think for me, the experience was the first step. And then I read a lot of Alan Watts, and it literally brought me to my knees. Like, I was walking through Central Park in New York, and I remember vividly like dropping in the snow on my knees at his words. And so his words brought back this experience, and I kind of hope that that's essentially what we can do, that we start with the experience, and then we imbue it deeper into the levels of culture and self through science, through words. And yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? We got 3 minutes and 10 seconds.
Thank you. Just a comment, I guess, in reference to that conversation. It feels like your analogy when we're kind of the baby being born, kind of this narcissistic place in our evolution. But to the comment that isn't the knowing just kind of a reflection of where we're at, and that there may be knowing as we evolve or grow or continue to learn more about our true identities, ourselves, or connections. It just feels like maybe this will be known, maybe this mystery will be known if we continue to grow as I don't know, hearts and connectors, whatever.
Yeah. So the first notion is not a derogatory statement about babies. Babies are great. Yeah. And Alan Watts talks about this all being a fun game. It's not bad necessarily to be a baby, and it's not bad to be narcissistic in a sense. There's going to be negative consequences, but that's life. We go through the motions, and our species will go through the motions. And ultimately, it's like Alan Watts says, we got to remember that it's all just doing this to itself. And if we have faith or trust that there's some reason to that, sometimes I think with the atrocities that happen, it's hard to really have faith in that. But at the same time, again, we're limited, and there's, sort of human humility. And I think that there's a meaningful part of that process. And I think maybe what you're pointing to is this sense of like remembering, which is language used in ayahuasca, that we all have this knowledge because we are that. And so it's not, new knowledge to discover, it's remembering the core essence of who we are.
We've got one back here, sorry.
Thank you for your talk today. Really enjoyed having you here, and thank you again to Promega for sponsoring such a great event. This question goes, I guess, a little bit more to some of the clinical aspects of integration. You had mentioned that you've done a lot of work with special populations, with veterans. In your experience, or have you had any experience with treating individuals that have come back, for example, with traumatic brain injury or paralyzing injuries where there's an element of disembodiment or lack of interoception, exteroception? How do you approach that from the integration standpoint? And do you understand the question I'm kind of getting at?
Yeah. So, working with TBIs and physical injuries and the like kind of somatic sense of integration is a really interesting, subfield of integration. I think it speaks to integration can happen in so many ways. Like finishing my PhD, I feel like my integration is to dance a lot, and that's very embodied. It's not therapy. And I don't think therapy is the only, nor necessarily like the prime integration case is wonderful, and so many things are wonderful. So working with TBI, I work with Mission Within, and it was actually founded, and VETS is another organization that kind of partner. It was founded by a man with TBI, and he came to Iboga because of the amazing sort of influences that Iboga has on TBI and healing. I think, I haven't worked in a somatic sense with those cases myself, but all I could say is that I certainly think it's important. I surf a lot, I'm in the ocean a lot, and I think to me that's been, in my psychedelic experiences, one of the most grounding ways to come back and reconnect with nature, get into our bodies. So I absolutely think that's a really important domain to focus on. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.